Hi, and welcome back to U.S. History with Mr. Snyder. And today we're going to finish up this chapter by talking about American expansionism, sometimes referred to as manifest destiny. Learning targets today are to explain how and why Americans migrated westward in the mid-1800s. We'll talk about how Texas becomes a part of the United States and its own independent nation for a little while. And we'll talk about the Mexican-American War, where we get most of the West from Mexico, and the California Gold Rush. So expansionism, these expansionists are people in the United States who want to move west. The lands in the southwest United States belonged to Mexico in 1830, and we'll see a map in a little bit. We want that land. We want to keep expanding. This whole theory and philosophy of manifest destiny is the belief that the U.S. is destined to own all or most of North America. And the term is coined by journalist John L. O'Sullivan. And so the expansionists want to get New Mexico, Texas, and California, however it takes. And there are expansionists in the South because those would then become slave states as well. But unfortunately, this expansionism, I mean, there's people already living there. Indians, Native Americans, and Mexicans live there. We don't care. Again, it's this philosophy that whites are superior to those cultures, and so they want to take over those lands from those people. They don't care if they live there. So in the mid-1830s, some people, fur trappers, go west way before this and live off the frontier. But basically in the mid-1830s through 1860, 400,000 people, like a mass of people, use the Oregon Trail to settle on the West Coast. They make the journey in wagon trains, as you can see here. So a lot of people would go in a train, sometimes as long as a mile wide they would go. They're usually left alone by the Indians, but not always. But sometimes it was the whites who would start trouble with the Indians. The main route is the Oregon Trail, also a great video game from the 1980s. It leaves from Independence, Missouri, and ends up in Oregon City, Oregon. And here you can see the red is the map of the Oregon Trail. The blue is the trail that the Mormons took. They went along the Oregon Trail for a little bit. The California Trail breaks away from the Oregon Trail in order to end up in California for the gold rush there. And the Oregon Trail ends up in Oregon City, Fort Walla Walla, and Portland in Oregon country. And so again, here's a screenshot from the video game. Again, I think they have modern variations of it, so download it, but it's kind of a role-playing game. It's pretty fun. So Texas, how does Texas become independent, and how do they become a part of the United States? American citizens began moving to the southwest to Texas, which belongs to Mexico at this point. And they don't follow the rules. Mexico is a Catholic country, so you had to become Catholic. They speak Spanish, and they don't allow slavery. Well, Americans violated all three of these. They remained Protestant, they didn't learn Spanish, and they smuggled slaves in, which was illegal. So everyone who complains about immigration today from the Southwest or from Mexico and not learning our language, English, and not doing that, we kind of did it to them first, so need to keep that in mind. In 1835, these Texas rebels rebel against a new authoritarian dictator, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. And Santa Anna attacks the Alamo, which is a former mission site there in Texas, and he slaughters everyone inside during the battle and executes all of the prisoners afterward, and that's where the cry, "Remember the Alamo," comes from. This upsets Texas. They vow to keep fighting against Mexico. And Sam Houston leads Texan forces against Santa Anna and wins. And Santa Anna signs a treaty recognizing Texas as an independent republic. Sam Houston immediately wants annexation by the United States, or he wants to be taken in by the United States. He wants to become a state. But the North doesn't want another slave state in the South. See, we have this balance, of slave states and free states. If one side gets more states than the other, they'll have more political representation in Congress and be able to make laws that the other side doesn't want. So they don't become a state until 1845 because the North doesn't want to add another slave state. So we have to add states basically 2 at a time. And finally, let's get to the Mexican-American War. In 1848, James K. Polk is elected president. Some major things he does is he annexes Texas, he splits Oregon Territory with Britain, avoiding another war because there was some dispute going on over who owned the Oregon Territory. Was it us or was it Britain who owned Canada? But he splits it along the 48th parallel, I believe, and we avoid another war with Britain. You can see here in the map that the land to the west of Texas is disputed. Does it belong to us or does it belong to Mexico? Well, we both have armies there, and Mexicans kill 11 U.S. soldiers in this disputed area, and Congress vows to go to war. Southerners and expansionists want this land to become slave states, but the North doesn't. They're weary of going to war because they don't want any land we get from Mexico to be slave states. And this never really was a huge war. I mean, it was really one-sided. The Americans win in less than 2 years. We're larger, we're more wealthy, and we're more industrious. And so in February 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is signed. And what this does is it gives the U.S. New Mexico and California for $15 million, and it considers the Rio Grande River, or the Rio Grande, is the new southern border of Texas. And then later on in the 1850s, we buy more land from Texas, this little red area here, called the Gadsden Purchase, because we want it to help build a railroad across the continent, or a transcontinental railroad. And so that's the Mexican-American War. You can also see the area that was disputed with Britain and the Compromise Line. And this is basically how we expanded into the West. Here's another look at it and how we got all of our land. The 1783 and then the Louisiana Purchase and then the 1845 annexation ceded by Mexico in 1848, California, Nevada, Utah, and then the Gadsden Purchase on the southern part of the United States in 1853. So that is how we got all of our land. And finally, coinciding with this, in 1848, workers in California, when it becomes a United States state, they see gold in a river. So by the next year, word spreads to the east, and 80,000 people migrate to California during the California Gold Rush. So 1849, which is why the San Francisco football team is called the 49ers during the Gold Rush. The California population goes from just hundreds of people to 225,000 people in 5 years. And in 1849, they apply for statehood. But right now, the balance is 15 free states and 15 slave states. The South doesn't want another free state added, just like the North didn't want another slave state added. So we're going to have to compromise somehow, and we'll get to that in the next chapter. That's all I have for you. Be sure to fill out your learning targets, and I will see you back in class. Bring any questions with you. Bye-bye.